8-year-old Maisie Calloway was digging through the Henderson's trash can at 6 in the morning, not for food, not for cans to sell. She was pulling out a cracked green garden hose, coiling it over her shoulder like a rope, and walking away without a word. Mr. Henderson watched from his porch in his bathrobe, coffee mug halfway to his mouth. "You want that old thing? It's split down the middle. Useless." "I know," Maisie said, and kept walking. She wasn't fixing hoses. Anyone could see that. She never brought tape, never brought glue, never patched a single hole. She wasn't selling the rubber. She never took the hoses to the recycling depot in town, even though it was only a 10-minute bike ride. She wasn't making crafts. No woven baskets, no garden art, no decorations hanging from the porch. By the end of that week, she had 11 broken hoses stacked behind her family's barn in rural Nebraska. And she wouldn't tell a single soul why. Her older brother Tucker, 16 and allergic to anything that wasn't a straight answer, cornered her by the chicken coop. "Everyone in town thinks you've lost it. You know that, right? Mrs. Pruitt says you're a strange little collector." Maisie just shrugged and kept coiling. By Sunday, half the county had heard about the girl gathering garbage. At church, 3 women stood near the coffee urn, trying not to laugh and failing. "She's got old man Weber's hose too," one whispered. "The one full of holes he ran over with the tractor." "Bless her heart," said another. "But what in the world is a child going to do with a pile of broken hoses?" Nobody knew, not the neighbors, not the farmers who'd seen 60 growing seasons between them, not even her own parents who exchanged a worried glance every time Maisie disappeared behind the barn with something new draped over her arm. Whatever she was planning, only she knew the shape of it. If you've ever been underestimated because people couldn't see your vision yet, subscribe and stay with us. Like this video and tell us where you're watching from. We'd love to know who's here. The Calloway farm sat on 60 acres of red Nebraska soil, and that summer, the soil was angry. It hadn't rained in nearly a month. The kind of dry that cracks the ground into little puzzle pieces. The kind of dry that makes farmers stand at their fences at dusk, staring at a sky that refuses to cooperate. Maisie's father, Daniel Calloway, was a quiet man who'd inherited the farm from his own father and carried the weight of it in his shoulders. He didn't yell when things went wrong. He just got quieter, and that summer he'd gone nearly silent. His tomato rows were wilting by 10 in the morning. His bean plants had started curling their leaves inward, a defense mechanism against the heat that meant the plants were rationing what little water they had left, like a body going into shock. "We lose the tomatoes. We lose the co-op contract," Daniel told his wife Renata one evening at the kitchen table. 3 years we've built that account, gone in one dry summer. Renata was the practical one. She didn't deal in worry. She dealt in solutions, or at least the search for them. "The Fletchers are running soaker hoses along their rows, cut their water use nearly in half." "Soaker hoses cost money we don't have," Daniel said. "And even if we bought them tomorrow, half our acreage would still be bone dry by the time they arrived." It was Grandpa Earl, Renata's father, who said nothing that night. He'd farmed this land through droughts in the 70s that made this one look gentle. He just listened, chewing slowly, his pale blue eyes drifting toward the window, toward the barn, toward wherever his granddaughter had disappeared to. Renata, for her part, had already tried the direct approach. 2 days earlier, she'd found Maisie hosing dirt off her hands at the outdoor spigot and asked plainly, "What exactly are you doing back there, honey?" "Fixing something," Maisie had said. "Fixing what?" "The part nobody's noticed yet." Renata hadn't pushed further. She recognized the look on her daughter's face, the same stubborn focus Daniel wore when he was working through a problem on the tractor, the kind of look that didn't respond well to interruption. She'd let it go, filing it away the way a practical woman files away anything she can't yet explain, patiently and without panic. Because Grandpa Earl had noticed something nobody else had. Maisie wasn't playing. Behind that barn, she was working. It had all started a full month before that morning, at the Hendersons' trash can, before the 11 hoses, before the whispers at church, before any of it. It began on an ordinary Tuesday, when Maisie had been sent to fetch water for the chickens. She'd noticed something strange near the base of the old oak tree by the vegetable patch. A tiny crack in the irrigation line, barely wider than a pencil, had been leaking there for who knew how long. Nobody had bothered fixing it because it seemed insignificant, but the grass around that one small leak was a different color than everywhere else. deep green, thick, almost lush, in a yard that was otherwise the color of straw. Maisie crouched down and stared at it for a long time. Everywhere else, water came from the sprinkler in wide, wasteful arcs, spraying into the air, evaporating before it ever reached the roots, running off into the dry cracks in the soil and disappearing. But here, at this one small leak, water dripped, slowly, steadily, directly into the ground, and the ground was drinking it, not losing it. She didn't say anything to anyone. She just started paying attention. She watched how her mother watered the flower boxes, fast, generous, and gone in seconds, most of it running straight off the surface. She watched how dew collected on spider webs at dawn and slid down, drop by drop, exactly to the base of each plant, like nature had already figured out the answer, and nobody was watching closely enough to see it. She asked Grandpa Earl a question that stopped him mid-sip of his morning coffee. "Grandpa, why do the plants by the leaky pipe look so much healthier than the ones the sprinkler hits?" He set his cup down slowly. "Because a sprinkler waters the air, child. That leak waters the roots." That single sentence rearranged everything in Maisie's mind. She started sneaking books out of the small farm-town library, thin paperback gardening guides, dusty pamphlets on soil moisture that hadn't been checked out in a decade. She didn't understand every word, but she understood the pictures. Diagrams of drip irrigation systems, tiny holes releasing water in slow, deliberate drops instead of loud, wasteful sprays. Real drip irrigation kits cost money. Money the Callaways didn't have to spare, not with the co-op contract already hanging by a thread. But broken garden hoses, those were free. Those were everywhere. Every neighbor for 2 miles had at least one cracked, split, sun-damaged hose sitting in a shed or a trash pile, waiting to be thrown out for good. That's when Maisie started her rounds, knocking on doors before school, digging through cans before the garbage truck came, coiling old rubber over her small shoulders and carrying it home, one piece at a time, while the whole town laughed and whispered and wondered what on earth she was thinking. She wasn't collecting junk. She was collecting the pieces of a solution nobody else had noticed yet. Building it wasn't easy, and it wasn't pretty. Behind the barn, in the shade where nobody usually looked, Maisie laid the hoses out end to end across the dirt, studying where each crack and puncture already existed. She realized something important. She didn't need to seal every hole. She needed some holes, small, controlled ones, spaced out along the length of each hose, so water could drip out slowly along the row instead of gushing from one end. She used a sewing needle, heated over a candle flame, to carefully widen a few of the smaller natural cracks into tiny, even holes. Too big, and the water would rush out in one spot and leave the rest of the row dry. Too small, and nothing would come through at all. She connected the hoses using scraps of tape, old bicycle inner tube, and a few brass fittings Grandpa Earl had lying in his toolbox, things he hadn't touched since before Maisie was born. For 3 days she worked in secret, running her patchwork lines along the base of the tomato plants, burying them just under a thin layer of mulch and dry grass clippings she'd raked from the yard. The way she'd read mulch helps hold moisture in, instead of letting it evaporate straight into the hot afternoon air. Then, with her heart pounding, she connected the whole thing to the outdoor spigot and turned the handle. For one glorious second, nothing happened. Then the entire system burst. Water sprayed sideways out of a poorly sealed joint, drenching Maisie from head to toe and turning the dry dirt around her into an instant mud pit. 2 of the hoses disconnected entirely and thrashed on the ground like startled snakes. Half the tomato row got flooded, while the other half stayed bone dry. Tucker, walking by with a bucket of feed, stopped and stared, then couldn't help himself. Well, that's one way to take a shower. Maisie didn't laugh. She sat in the mud, soaked, staring at her failed invention, feeling something twist hard in her chest. That night at dinner, she didn't say a word. Renata noticed the mud still crusted behind her daughter's ears. Daniel noticed the defeated slump in her shoulders. Even Tucker, for all his teasing, noticed she barely touched her food. It was Grandpa Earl who finally spoke. "You know," he said, cutting his pork chop, not looking up, "first system I ever built with my own hands failed worse than that. Flooded my father's whole east field. He didn't speak to me for a week." Maisie looked up. But the second attempt, Grandpa Earl continued, worked well enough to save half our corn that year. And the third attempt is the one that kept this family fed through the worst drought this county's ever seen. He finally met her eyes. Whatever you're building back there, girl, you don't quit after the failures. You quit after you stop trying to fix them. Nobody at that table asked what she was building, but for the first time, nobody laughed either. The second attempt was better, but it still wasn't right. Maisie fixed the joint that had burst, wrapping it tighter with layers of old inner tube and securing it with wire she'd bent by hand. She spaced the drip holes more evenly this time, testing the water pressure by feel, adjusting where the flow ran too strong or too weak. The system held. Water dripped, slow and steady, exactly like she'd seen at that old oak tree a month before. But 3 of her connector joints, cobbled together from mismatched hose diameters, still leaked at the seams, wasting almost as much water as it saved. She almost gave up that night. She sat behind the barn in the dark, staring at her tangle of patched rubber, wondering if everyone laughing at her had been right all along. Then she remembered the spider web, the way each drop found its way to exactly the right place, one bead at a time, with nothing wasted. She went back to her library books. She found a diagram showing how old hose A sections could be joined using short pieces of rigid pipe as internal sleeves, gripped tight by hose clamps instead of tape or wire. She didn't have hose clamps. But Grandpa Earl's toolbox, it turned out, had exactly 6 of them, rusted but functional, left over from a tractor repair decades ago. The third attempt took her 4 more days. When she turned the spigot handle this time, the water moved through the entire length of hose in a slow, quiet hiss. No bursts, no flooding. Just a steady, patient drip, drop by drop, sinking straight into the soil beneath the mulch, exactly where the roots were waiting. Over the next 2 weeks, something extraordinary happened to the Callaway tomato rows. While the rest of the farm's crops continued to struggle under the relentless sun, leaves curling, stems thinning, soil turning to dust, the section watered by Maisie's patchwork system began to transform. The leaves deepened from a pale, stressed yellow-green into a rich, healthy emerald. The stems thickened. The soil beneath the mulch stayed cool and dark and damp to the touch. Even at the hottest part of the afternoon, while just 3 feet away, unwatered ground was cracked and pale as bone. Tomatoes that had been small and stunted began to swell, heavy and red, weighing down their vines. Daniel Callaway walked the rows one evening, running his thumb over a leaf, feeling its thickness, its moisture. He crouched down and pressed his palm flat against the soil. "Renata," he called out, his quiet voice cracking slightly. "Come look at this." She did. And for a long moment, neither of them said anything at all. Grandpa Earl just smiled, the way a man smiles when he's been proven right about something he never said out loud. Word travels fast in a small farming town, especially when it involves something nobody can explain. Through the following weeks, a few curious neighbors wandered by to see the strange green rows for themselves. Mr. Henderson shaking his head at the tomatoes thriving in soil that should have killed them, Mrs. Pruitt murmuring that she'd never seen anything like it. But most of the county held back, unconvinced that a patchwork of trash could really be responsible. Plenty of farmers had seen one lucky row before. A real verdict, everyone quietly agreed, would come at harvest. So when harvest day arrived, half the county showed up to watch. They lined the fence at the edge of the Callaway property the way people gather for a parade, arms crossed, some skeptical, some simply curious. None of them quite ready to believe what they were about to see. Daniel backed the truck up to the first row himself, and Tucker and Maisie began loading crates side by side. What came out of that ground silenced them. Crate after crate of deep red tomatoes, so heavy the vines had needed staking. Thick-stemmed beans in numbers nobody expected from a summer that dry. Squash and peppers that should have shriveled weeks earlier, pulled instead from cool, dark soil that stayed damp, even under the relentless afternoon sun. By the time the truck bed was full, it held more than the co-op contract required. More, Daniel admitted quietly, than he'd harvested in the 2 good years before the drought. Mr. Henderson, the man who'd given away his cracked hose without a second thought, stood at the edge of the row with his hands on his hips, watching crate after crate go by. "I don't understand it," he finally admitted. "I threw that hose out because it was garbage, and now look at it." Mrs. Pruitt, who'd called Maisie a strange little collector at church, stood beside him, staring at the loaded truck in disbelief. "How does something broken end up doing this?" she asked, not to anyone in particular. Maisie, mud still under her fingernails, finally spoke. "A sprinkler waters the air," she said, echoing her grandfather's words from a month before. "This waters the roots. Some of the holes were already there. I made the rest myself, and decided where the water should go instead of letting it go everywhere." Nobody laughed this time. In the days after, half the county walked through the Callaway farm to see the system up close. Old man Weber, whose split hose had become part of the very first working line, asked if she'd help him build one for his own drought-stressed beans. Mr. Henderson asked the same for his squash. Even Tucker, who'd teased her the hardest, spent an entire Saturday helping her lay lines along the last untouched row, quietly proud in a way he'd never admit out loud. The women from church came too, not to whisper this time, but to ask questions, notebooks in hand, wanting to know exactly how she'd spaced the holes and buried the mulch. There was no revenge in it for Maisie, no triumphant gloating, just quiet satisfaction and something new in the way people looked at her. Not confusion anymore, but respect. That evening, once the truck had gone and the crowd had thinned, Maisie sat on the fence rail with Grandpa Earl, watching the sun drop low over rows of green that shouldn't have existed in a summer that dry. "You know what the real lesson is here, don't you?" he asked. Maisie shook her head. "It was never about the hoses," he said. "Anybody could have picked up that trash. It's about noticing what everyone else walks right past. It's about trying something, watching it fail, and trying again instead of walking away. That's not luck, girl. That's the only thing that ever built anything worth having." Maisie looked out over the rows she'd saved, not with pride exactly, but with something quieter and steadier. The understanding that the thing everyone had laughed at was never really junk at all. It had just been waiting for someone patient enough to see what it could become. What's something you've turned from trash into treasure? Tell us in the comments below. Let us know where you're watching this from. We love hearing from every corner of the world. And if this story moved you, subscribe for more inspiring farming stories like this one.